Today, we're going to use an ancient Greek brain teaser to understand something incredibly modern. Why our arguments online feel so, well, chaotic and just impossible to solve. And it all kicks off with a simple puzzle about an arrow.
All right, let's just dive right into this. There was this philosopher, Zeno of Elea, and he made a very, very simple observation. Picture an arrow flying through the air. If you could just freeze time for one single, infinitely small instant, that arrow would have to be in one single, specific spot. It can't be in two places at once, right? It's got to be somewhere.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. This is the logical next step Zeno takes. If at that one single instant the arrow is in just one spot, well then it must be stationary. I mean, to be moving means you're in one place now and a different place a moment later. But in a single frozen instant, nope, you're at rest.
And there it is! That's Zeno's famous paradox. If the arrow is stationary at every single instant of its flight, and its entire flight is just made up of all those instants, then how does it ever actually move? How does it get from the bow to the target? It feels like a total trick question, but this little puzzle, it's actually the key to a much, much bigger idea.
So what was the point of this whole brain twister? Zeno wasn't actually trying to break physics. He was trying to start a fight inside our own heads, a battle between what we see and what we can logically prove.
See, Zeno's point wasn't about archery at all. It was about this fundamental conflict. Your eyes are basically screaming at you, the arrow is moving, I can see it. But a chain of what seems like perfect logic tells you, nope, movement is impossible. So which one do you trust? What's more real? The world as you experience it, or the world as your mind can prove it to be?
I mean, think about how radical that idea was, that the human mind, just by using pure reason, could land on a truth that completely contradicts everything we experience. It suggests there's this power inside us, our intellect, that can just override the loud, insistent testimony of our own senses.
And this way of thinking, well, it gave birth to a huge concept, one that would pretty much dominate Western thought for centuries. It's the belief in universal reason. The idea that there's a single, objective truth out there that doesn't depend on who you are, where you're from, or what you've seen. It's a truth you can get to just by thinking correctly.
So for like 2,000 years, this faith in pure, clean, disembodied reason, it was the bedrock of philosophy, science, progress. It seemed totally unshakable. And then the 20th century happened, and the cracks really started to show. First, you had the sheer irrational brutality of World War I, which made the whole idea of humanity rationally progressing toward a better future seem like a sick joke. Then, a wave of postmodern philosophers came along and started to systematically tear down the very idea of universal truths, calling them fictions. And finally, thinkers began pointing out that this so-called universal reason looked an awful lot like a very specific, European way of thinking.
So here's the crucial point. The critics were basically saying that pure reason was anything but pure. They argued it was a tool that claimed to be universal, but was actually super biased. It completely ignored the real, lived experiences of people, their bodies, their cultures, their identities, and in fact, had often been used not to liberate people, but to justify power and exclude other ways of knowing.
So, with the throne of universal reason now sitting empty, a powerful new claimant to the concept of truth began to emerge. If a big, abstract logical argument wasn't the final word anymore, then what was?
The answer that came roaring back was lived experience. The whole focus shifted away from what could be proven with abstract logic and moved toward what had been experienced personally. The ultimate source of authority became your story, my story, our stories.
And this right here captures both the incredible power and, the profound challenge of this shift. On the one hand, it was revolutionary in a great way. Voices and stories that had been silenced for centuries were finally being heard. But on the other hand, if every personal story is its own truth, what happens to the idea of a single, shared reality that we can all agree on?
And that brings us straight to today, because this whole philosophical battle, the one that started with an arrow in ancient Greece, is now the central conflict playing out every single day in our social media feeds.
The old rules are just gone. The old authorities have been completely challenged. In this new digital frontier, there's no gravity, no clear up or down. It's just a chaotic, wide-open space where completely new kinds of arguments are taking place.
And this gets us to the single biggest change, the one thing that makes our moment completely unprecedented.
For the very first time in human history, the old gatekeepers are gone. The average person can now publish their story to a global audience, right there alongside journalists, academics, and politicians.
So today, Zeno's ancient war is reborn online. On one side, you have Team Reason. They appeal to data, to experts, to institutions, and they claim a kind of objective, universal view. On the other side, you've got Team Story. They appeal to lived experience, to personal testimony, to the power of public feeling. One says, look at the logic, and the other says, listen to my experience.
So this clash of truths leaves us in this really confusing, disorienting, and frankly, often hostile information landscape. It's a place where it feels like we can't even agree on the basic terms of a debate, let alone who won or what the conclusion is.
You know, in the real world, Zeno's arrow does eventually hit its target. But here, in our world of ideas, its paradox is more alive than ever. It forces us to ask, in an age where logic and story are at war, how do we find a shared truth? Is our future just an endless shouting match between different realities, or can we find a new way to see the world and maybe each other together?